Welcome back, everyone, to glorious Ottoman Empire. We are in 1840, and Luca fucking wants an alliance. I just immediately go no and ally instead with the United Kingdom. Now, it's often the case that if you're like in the Middle East, like if you're in anywhere but Europe and maybe East Asia, you want to ally the UK. In Victoria, because they're by far the strongest country. Of course, right now they seem to be in trouble. They have 37 military score while mobilized, so I'm not sure exactly what's going on with them. But still, this is not like an immediate play, this is a long-term play. And as you can see, I'm eyeing up the border of Persia, and I'm working with my influence to make sure that no one but us has access there. And we get a nice little event, the rise of Bedr Khan, who is essentially this leader in, well, modern-day Kurdistan, known as Botan, which, as you can see, is like split between a lot of different bays, I suppose they'd be called, I'm not sure, that are our puppets, but that are gonna unify under this Bedr Khan to try to achieve their independence. And, you know, we don't particularly like that, and in fact the game does not like give them armies, so it's rather easy to take them down. But yeah, as far as I know, these guys are basically Kurdistan. I even fund my troops, which is not like required. In fact, I allied Persia earlier, and the Persians, you know, they're pretty happy to invade the Kurds as well, and they're helping me, so that's kind of nice. Good on them, good on them. And yeah, as you can see, they try to build armies, but it's not really to any avail. It's pretty futile. That's unfortunate for them. And yeah, so my idea, like when I started up the game, was that Persia was going to be a bit of a punching bag for me, that I was going to take over a bunch of their territory, especially the border state that I was clicking on earlier, Ahvaz. Later in the game gets oil, so with hindsight being 2020, I'm like, and that should probably be something that I do. But the Persians turned out to be quite friendly. And so might as well get them as an ally while they're useful. So after a pretty brief war, they decide to surrender because they have no chance, and we get our lands returned. And so now the Ottomans are basically unified on their original borders at the beginning, and we can finally pay our troops less. And finally think about economics. Now, we have a ton of useful strategic resources in the Ottoman Empire, tons of coal. So I switch over to the reactionaries in their political factions, who allow me, by their state capitalist economic policy, to build factories. Now, we have a ton of, for example, grain, which makes it quite easy for canneries to work. And also liquor distilleries, which both are goods that are required to maintain infantry, so they're quite good. And we also have sulfur and coal, which allow us to get glass and later, you know, much heavier industry, like machine parts factories and steel mills, along with iron. So yeah, the Ottoman Empire actually in Victoria II is in a very, very good position for industrial expansion. Now, in real life, interestingly enough, I've read an article on JSTOR, basically, while researching for this, apparently, and also I decided to get positivism for the education efficiency, which allows me, well, actually, maybe idealism? No, positivism. Again, we want our pops to be as literate as possible so that they can promote better and so that our research is stronger. Now, in real life, apparently, the Ottomans did embark on a sort of industrial project, industrial expansion in the 1840s, which kind of just didn't work because of whole issues with trade and protectionism that were related to the intrusion of foreign powers in the Ottomans that we talked about in the last episode. Yeah, then we can finally get some political reforms. Now, some of them are not that important, but like, for example, slavery is quite important to outlaw, because all pups that are slaves cannot get, for example, educated, they cannot promote to factory workers, and they're less productive. But first, I actually go down the line for allowing minorities' rights. And if you know anything about the Ottoman Empire, you know that we have the minorities in the tons. So getting more of that is going to be useful also because it gives assimilation rate. And next up, my idea is to sort of kick the foreign powers out of a bunch of what really should be Ottoman sphere countries. So, like, for example, Persia. For example, some of the Yemeni sultanates and Greece. And also the Wallachia and Moldavia, little puppet states that we have up there, which unfortunately at the beginning start with a lot of Russian influence, and the Russians tend to influence them quite heavily, and that always becomes a bit of a problem later down the line, because there's a lot of events and wait, slave demographics. Okay, Christian oppression. Yeah, there's I like the tax efficiency. That's like the jizya tax. Yeah, obviously. But yeah, essentially, and this is why, by the way, I'm doing all allowed rights, because you get a ton of nationalist events and, you know, just general basic unrest of like different culture, different religions. So mitigating that as much as possible is going to be important. But essentially, like, there's a lot of problems between Russia and the Ottomans when it comes to Wallachia, because Wallachia and Moldavia, because they're Ottoman puppets, but they often get influenced by Russia and become in the Russian sphere. And there's later events to annex them, but if the Russians have a high influence over them, they can intervene on their side. So there can be wars between the Russia and the Ottomans over those pathetic proto-Romanias, essentially. Anyway, we are influencing Zaidi, which is one of the most glorious Yemeni sultanates, the most northern one, where Sana'a is. And we're also finally getting to sort of expand our army and navy in peacetime, which is quite important because, you know, the less we fight, the more pops we're going to have to fight later on. Now, we want to attack the Greeks to sort of snuff out the torch of Greece. And what we've done is that we have reduced the influence of France and the UK. We'll start as friendly down below, because otherwise they can intervene on their side. And wars like these are kind of one of the reasons why I love Victoria 2. You'll see that the war is actually really, really easy. But there is a lot of diplomatic work that goes into that, into making it easy. And in fact, one of the parts of, and unfortunately we get a ton of infamy for that, one of the parts of Victoria 2 that I oddly think is, like, unironically good is that the warfare is pretty bad because it encourages you to use more diplomatic and economic means to become great. Anyway, unfortunately Greece has two states within it, the Peloponnese and I guess Attica is their capital state, so we cannot annex them in one go. We have to first fucking take the Peloponnese and then later get a conquer war goal, which is a bit of an annoyance because conquer war goals cost a lot of infamy, pretty much all of your possible infamy. And yeah, basically the war is really, really easy because Greece is pathetically tiny, and the way that, like, even historically they expanded is by garnering, like, playing a good diplomatic game, essentially. There's a lot of Greeks outside of Greece itself basically before 1920 and 1922, and unity with them is what the Greeks called enosis, you know, essentially the expansion to a greater Greece that would encompass essentially the entire Aegean, from Corfu in the west and Epirus in the west, which is basically in modern-day southern Albania, all the way to obviously Cyprus in the east. But we don't want any of that, obviously. We're, however, well aware that a ton of countries are going to support the Greeks, especially Russia and the UK, to get more influence in the Mediterranean region. And so we want to kill them as quickly as possible because they're a potential threat. And again, there's a ton of Greeks in the Ottoman Empire. Like, Greece could theoretically expand all the way to Constantinople. And yeah, obviously the UK is in the middle of expanding in Central Asia, which is what they're kind of busy doing at the start of the game. And we're happy to oblige in helping them, even though the Afghans were previously friendly with us, because, well, we want the UK to be in favor of us. And finally, we're getting some of the crucial education texts, so we can finally start to get some economic and industrial texts. Especially railroads are going to be important because they allow you to get some pretty precious bonuses to industrial productivity to make your factories profitable. Now, as you could see, we have also, like, as you saw, we also had an event or a decision to protect the Ottoman economy. Essentially, after you research, glorious cut down to size, Casus Belli. Essentially, after you research the first trade tech, first commerce tech, you can essentially choose a trade policy. We choose protectionism, of course. Well, of course, because it allows tariffs to be stronger, and tariffs are pretty much the best way to get money in the early game. We also get a Casus Belli cut down to size on Morocco for an event, but we obviously don't want to fight the French, who are sphering Morocco, so we do not take that. But we got the cut down to size on Yemen after on Zaidi, after the Zaidi executes Sailor event, which is kind of dumb that it gives you a cut down to size. Now, cut down to size prevents them from building new armies, caps their army size, and makes it so that they pay you reparations. The paying reparations part is relatively fine, but like, it's kind of weird that it doesn't like just add them to your sphere. I just don't understand that. And then there's a nice event to spend some, basically a change to get influence in Bahrain, which is kind of nice. Alright, now we get the railroad, and we can finally go and get idealism, which increases your research points. Obviously quite important to get as early as possible all the research texts, or sorry, all the philosophy texts technically, so that you get as many research points as possible. And railroads, we can just start building those bad boys everywhere, which is very, very nice. I enjoy having railroads because they increase both the productivity of RGOs, resource gathering operations, you know, the random grain and coal, and so that's just straight up money that you're gonna get out of it. And then they also increase the productivity of the industry. Now, in the early game, what I always do is that I heavily subsidize industry and just kind of try to build as many factories as possible, because as many different kinds, of factories as possible, because the way the economy works in Victoria 2 is kind of strange. Like, you never really know what's gonna work until you actually play the game. Like, for example, that luxury clothes factory in Thrace is going really, really nicely. That's nice. But, like, what you think is gonna work sometimes doesn't. And so, at the beginning, you just kind of build as much as possible, and you see what works, and after you figure that out, you just kind of invest heavily into it, and then you get an Irish nationalist rebellion. What? This is like one of the most incompetent UKs I think I've ever seen. They managed, see, note the date, it's 1847. They managed to get an Irish nationalist rebellion with the potato blight, essentially. So yeah, that's basically about it for this episode. Kind of a slow industrial, beginnings of industrial expansion and slow territorial expansion, but yeah, soon enough, there's gonna be more explosive things going on to our north and south. So in any case, thank you all for watching, hope you've enjoyed, and I'll see you soon.